places you are actually attending this session, guys? Can you please mention in the chat? I'm here. I'm in Odisha right now. To be very specific, I'm in Bhubaneswar. So can you please mention your places? Okay, I'm seeing it. Telangana, Gurgaon, Allahabad, Hyderabad, West Bengal, Pune, Odisha, Navi Mumbai, Tamil Nadu, Mathura, Hyderabad. Okay, that's great. Mumbai, Sri Lanka. Okay, we have from Sri Lanka too. Uttarakhand, Navi Mumbai. That's great. That's great. So I see people from like Jaipur, Mumbai again, Bhubaneswar, Karnataka. Okay. So I see many people from Bhubaneswar. So I'm also there in Bhubaneswar. So hi all, like all those who are in Bhubaneswar, also to those who are not in Bhubaneswar. Hi to everyone actually. So okay. Yep. Indore, Akshay mentioned Indore. That's great. That's great. So we have people from like all corners of this country. Even some people are outside this country. Like I got to know from Sri Lanka and all. So that's very great. Thank you all guys for joining in this session. So I know like you all are waiting for your session to get started. Even Pulkit sir is there already jumped in. So let me introduce him to all of you guys. So he's a actually data scientist, I can say. Okay, he has a 4 years of experience, and he is one of a company which all of us wants to get in, or at some point of time we wanted to get in. Okay, so I hope like you would enjoy his sessions like today and tomorrow. It is all about SQL that are used for data science, and he's the right person actually to get it along, like get you all along with the this thing SQL with data science. Okay, but before you start with it, I just want to make one announcement, guys. What is that? So you just have to attend live both the classes like today and tomorrow. Okay, attendance link would be provided to you. You have to fill the attendance. Okay, you might think, what is this attendance thing? Is it a school or something? Yeah, it's not a school, but you just put the attendance. That's how you would be eligible for the examination. Yes, right. You do have an examination after this essential courses done. It's free of cost course. Even the examination is free, but yes, you do have to earn your certificate. It's not like you just attend the course and you get the certificate. No, you attend the course, attend the session, both the session you attended, put your attendance, you will be eligible for the examination. When you qualify the examination, only then you will be getting certificate, guys. Okay, so just try to attend this and get as more as possible. Hi Pulkit sir. So I'll not take too much long, and so I would just give it to you. It's all yours now. I'll be just in the back end now.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Subrat. I hope everybody can hear me loud and clear. You can,
yes,
respond
audible
on the chat. Yeah. Okay. Great. Great. All right. So, uh, warm welcome to everyone. So we'll get started with our session on SQL, right? And the way we are going to do it is we are going to have a total of 4 hours, right? And today we'll be covering 2 hours, and then again we'll have tomorrow 2 hours. Okay. Okay. I hear about lag issues. Is everybody facing lag issues, or is it just with a few folks? Okay. So then it might be at your end. Great. But yeah, you can definitely let me know whenever you feel there's anything, at least, and okay. So in these trainings, I just have a way of going around. If there is an issue and somebody writes over it, and if a lot of people feel that the issue is really the case, you can start writing +1, and that would let me know that this issue is really occurring. And if I don't see +1, I'll believe that the issue is occurring only at that person's end. Okay. So okay, without wasting any more time, we'll get started with the session. So let me share my screen with you. Okay, so everybody able to see my screen? Great. And is there anything blocking the screen also? Any kind of, so because I have the chat box with me. Okay, great. Great, great, great. Perfect. All right. So we'll get started with the session for today. Okay, so let's quickly go through what all we'll be covering in these sessions, right? And I'll also set some context about how deep are we going to go in these sessions, right? So we'll start by talking a little bit about what is RDBMS, what is SQL, right? After that, we'll start jumping into understanding different parts of SQL. Okay, so what are the different types of queries that we do? After that, we'll start with the real hands-on sessions where we'll start writing some SQL queries. Okay, so we'll start with some basic ones where we talk about select and where clauses, right? After the select and where clause, we'll talk about some functions and aggregates, and post that we'll jump into some intermediate SQL stuff. I'll not call it advanced, I'll call it intermediate, because that's the next step that you take after learning about select and where clauses. So we'll talk about group by and having. Okay, and after that you'll also learn about sorting your data, right, which is the order by clause. And after that, okay, join is a little bit advanced topic, but if you are with me in this, we'll get through it, right? It shouldn't be a problem if you get everything before that well, right? So we'll talk about different kinds of joins that are there, right? Okay. Okay, so let's start the session by setting some context. And what I mean by context is, let's talk a little bit about what all do we plan to cover through the course of this section. So we'll keep it fairly practical, right? We'll learn things from a practical standpoint of view. We'll learn to write SQL queries, okay? And before we jump into writing SQL queries, there's a short bit of theory portion that needs to be touched and covered up. So we'll talk about that now. So let's start talking about few of these things, and we'll also try to keep it fairly interactive. So I'll ask you guys questions and you can respond on the chat section. Okay. And if there is something really necessary where you guys need to turn up your speaker, then we'll do so. Okay, but otherwise we'll try to stick to the chat section. So let's start by talking about data, because the whole idea of SQL revolves around data. So let's make it very clear, what do we mean by data? Okay, so data is any information that you can store on your computer memory, right? That's basically what data is, right? I can even go more abstract in the sense that any kind of information, even if it's not on your computer, you can still call it data, right? But since we are dealing with SQL, we'll try to understand everything in context of computers, right, and softwares. So very first thing is data, right? So everything that you store on your PC or computer constitutes data, right? And for that matter, even your mobile phones. So any files, images, videos that you take and share on your system, everything is data. Okay, but when we deal with the topic of SQL, we go into something which does not constitute all of these kinds of data, right? So we stick to something called as structured data. Okay, so anybody wants to take a dig at what structured data is? Well, the definition is right in front of you guys, but still, if you want to, okay, correct. So somebody says that it's data stored in the form of rows and columns. So yeah, you're there. You're correct. So it's data stored in tabular form. All of you are correct about it, right? So let me talk a little bit more about it. So structured data is basically data which is in well-defined tables, right? So like we talked about data overall, we talked about images and text and video. So consider a Word file. Will Word file constitute a structured data? It will not, right? Even your audio and video files, they won't constitute as structured data. Why? Because the way we have defined structured data is that's data that can be stored in tabular format, okay? Which means data that can be stored in the form of rows and columns, okay? So your Excel data can make a very good case of being a structured data, right? So whatever data you store in your Excel sheets or Excel workbooks, they form your structured data, right? And there is much more to structured data, which we'll discover as we go along in this course, okay? So now that we've already talked about data, let's talk about what is database. Okay, so database is basically a collection of all these data, right? But again, when we talk about database in terms of computers, in terms of structured data, we are trying to say that database is a collection of all these tables. Okay, so it is a collection being formed with the help of different tabular data formats, right? And again, if you want to take an example of a database, Excel workbooks are an example of database if you think about it, right? So why I say that? Because if you think about it closely, one Excel sheet would make up one table, okay? And one Excel workbook can have multiple tables in it, right? So let me take an example for it, for instance. So let's say we have our student related data, or let's say college related or some course related data, right? So there can be one Excel sheet responsible for capturing all the different instructors that are there, one sheet for capturing all the students that are there, and one more sheet to capture maybe administrative stuff like attendance and so on and so forth, right? So if you put all these files in one Excel workbook, then that Excel workbook is actually acting like a database. So database is a collection of your structured tables. Okay, I hope these three definitions are clear to you guys. And there's a little more to the definition of database where we talk about something called as relational databases. Okay, and when we say relational database, apart from your usual tables, right, or different Excel sheets, we are storing one more additional information, which is the relationship between these tables. Okay, so as we go along, you'll discover what do I mean by that. But till this point, does anybody have any questions, any concerns? Okay, I'll move on. Okay, so let's start going a little deeper into understanding the whole idea of databases in terms of, in context of computers. Okay, so there's something called as relational database management system. Okay, so let's first figure out what database management system is, and then we'll come into relational part as well. So when we say database management system, what we are trying to say is that we need a software now to handle everything that we want to do with our databases. So now think about it. Let's say you have a database and you want to be able to perform some operations on top of it. Let's take some very simple example. Let's say I want to, bring out from my database the top 10 performers, okay, the top 10 students. So I need to do some kind of operation. Now, what is the whole idea of management system? That they make it very simple for you to query these databases. Okay, so I just threw a word called query, where I simply mean that how to fetch data from a database. Okay, so database management systems are typically software systems, right, which help us in organizing databases, right, and performing different kinds of operations on these databases. And these operations can be storing, accessing, manipulating, everything, right? So any kind of operation that you want to do. And you already know what I mean by a relational database, which is where all your relationships are also stored very well. So now if you want to make a contrast with your usual Excel workbooks, so there is no way in an Excel workbook where you can store some kind of a relationship between different sheets. All these sheets are usually isolated, right? But in relational database management systems, you can store some kind of relationships also among these different tables. So for example, let's say there's a student table and a teacher table. Now, there will be certain links going from one table to the other where you can get the, you can think of it like this. Let's say for a particular student, if I want to fetch the teacher information, I can use those links to get that information, right? And if you think about it, there's no such way to do that in an Excel. So that's where your relational database management systems come into place. They help you to organize the whole idea of databases and doing all sorts of operations on them much easier and simplified, right? So again, think about it like this. Okay, let's go forward, and then we'll come back to, if there's any clarity remaining, we'll come back to it. So once we touch upon the topic of RDBMS, the logical next thing to talk about is structured query language. And the reason why that's the next logical thing to talk about is because we talked about a few different things when we talked about RDBMS, and the things that caught most of our attention was things like storing, accessing, and manipulating, right? So now we already know that in an RDBMS, you can do all these different operations, but how do you do those? So there's something called as structured query language, which is a language which is used for doing all these different operations for accessing, fetching, and manipulating data from a database. Okay, so let's say your DBMS holds a database and you want to query it, you want to fetch the data out of it, maybe to create some reports, to perform some operations. The way you do that is by using a structured query language. Okay, so that's the whole idea of using a SQL. So, okay, let's make it more clear. Let's think about it like this. So all of us to join this call, we are using Zoom. Okay, Zoom is the medium that we have decided, right? And you can think of Zoom like a black box. So what I mean by black box is you don't know how Zoom is doing everything underneath, right? How the whole software of Zoom is written. What you need to know is how you can join the call, mute the call, switch the video on and off, share things with other folks, right? That's all you need to know. So the way you use Zoom is very analogous to how you use structured query language on a relational database management system. Okay, so SQL is a means of fetching data, accessing data, and performing all sorts of operations on top of RDBMS. But how RDBMS is storing this data underneath is a black box for you, and you do need not go deeper into it and understand how the relational RDBMS is working, right? So whatever company has designed the RDBMS, they've already done half the work for you. All you need to do is you need to learn how to use it. So same thing goes with Excel. You don't know how Excel is performing operations underneath. It's like a black box for you, but you know how to perform different operations inside Excel. So you learn those, right? And get your work done. So everybody clear with this point? Anybody has any questions regarding RDBMS or what SQL is meant for? Okay, I believe everybody is good till now. Great. So, okay, one more thing. We talk about structured query language, right? And we see the word structured over here. So anybody has any idea what do we really mean by this word structured? So I think query language is very clear. Okay, language to query, but why the word structured? Any guesses? It's perfectly okay to be wrong, don't worry about it. Okay, so I'm getting some answers. So somebody says data is in tabular format. Okay, and a lot of you say that a lot of answers are about the fact that since we are dealing with structured data, right? So I can understand why this would lead you to give that answer, but this is not entirely accurate. Okay, so the reason why we call it a structured query language is because the way you execute this query has certain steps associated with it, and you have to follow those steps one after the other. So there's a structure to how you write these queries, and that's why it's called a structured query language, not because it's associated with structured data. Okay, I hope now it's clear to everybody what do we mean by structured query language. So the way the rules of the language are written, you have to go one by one with those, right? You have to perform the operations in a certain sequence or in a certain manner, right? And that's exactly the way they are executed by the RDBMS also. So that's why it's a structured query language. Okay, great. So now that we've talked about RDBMS, let's talk about different kinds of RDBMS systems that are available out there in the market. Okay, so I think a lot of you would have heard about all these different ones. Anybody who has not heard about this and all these different words that you see over here are completely new to you? For example, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL Server, SQLite. Anybody who's completely new to this and has never heard? Okay, great. So there's a good possibility. I believe there are two possibilities to this, right? So one is that you are making a transition into this field, and you're not very aware of the different kinds of databases that are out there in the market, and that's perfectly okay. And maybe there could be students who are still students who have not yet transitioned into industry or career, and they don't know about this. It's perfectly fine. So the idea is that, think about it like this. um, Oracle, Postgres, MySQL, all of these are just like Zoom, WebEx, Google Meet, Google Hangout, and the most popular one, I'm forgetting the name. Yeah, but the idea is RDBMS. You can think of RDBMS like a video calling tool, and there are different companies that have created different tools, right? So that's the analogy with which you can look at it. So all these are different companies that have created these different kinds of SQL, different kinds of RDBMS systems. Okay, everybody clear with this? Okay, so Akshay asks an interesting question. What is NoSQL? So Akshay, we'll touch upon this maybe towards the end of the class, because this is not related with the SQL topic. So if you can hold on to that question and remind me later when we proceed towards the end, I'll definitely pick it up. Okay, great. So yeah, so I think now it's clear to everybody. So Oracle is a kind of a RDBMS created by the Oracle company. It's a company. Then there is Postgres, okay, which is an open source. So what we mean by open source is it is free to use. For Oracle, you have to pay money, right? And similarly, MySQL is also free to use, right? It's open source. And Microsoft SQL Server, as the name suggests, is something that is created by Microsoft, right? And you have to take a subscription, you have to pay for it to use their RDBMS services, okay? And now the good thing about SQL, so why do we really study SQL, okay? So this is where the analogy starts going apart a little bit, right? So think about it like this. You know, we have in Zoom and WebEx, we have almost the same kind of functionalities, but different ways to work on those functionalities. Somebody would have a pause button in the bottom corner, somebody in the top corner, somebody right in the middle of the screen, right? But when we talk about RDBMS, one thing which is good is that there is only one standardized way of querying all of them. So the SQL that you learn is common to all of them with very small changes in syntax here and there, right? But otherwise, the general way you write a SQL query remains same for all the different RDBMS systems. Okay, so you have to learn. If you know SQL, you can work on any of these. Okay, is the idea clear to everybody now about standardization of SQL language? So SQL, SQL, all these words I might use interchangeably, but they mean the same thing. Okay, they're not any different. Okay, some quick yes or no, everybody with me so far in the understanding, especially asking all those people to whom the concept is totally new. Are you with me so far? Any particular point you need a repetition of? Right now we are talking only about, we are yet to go into the deep stuff, into the language learning stuff. Right now we are just talking about, we are setting the context. Yeah. So SQL, okay, somebody's asking why do we call it SQL? It was just a way of, elaborating on the word SQL. So SQL, so that you can, without gaps, say the whole thing out. That's all. That's it. Nothing else to it. Okay. So it's, you call it SQL and you call it out SQL, but you'd never spell it as SEQUEL or something like that. Okay. Okay. Any question that has not been addressed yet? Maybe some questions got lost in the yeses and the nos. Anybody has any question?
Sir, there is a doubt from Anusha. Why is it called SQL?
Yeah, I think I answered that question. Anusha, did you get the answer? I think I just talked about it. Do you need a quick repeat? I'll give a quick repeat. So
yes, you can.
yeah, I'll give a very quick repetition. So SQL is just an elongated word used for SQL. That's all. So since people don't want to use breaks like SQL, they just call it SQL. So, but it's referring to the exact same thing. There's no difference. Great.
Sir, sorry for the interruption.
Yes.
We also have one more doubt from Rahul Kumar.
Okay.
He's asking, RDBMS applications deal with big data?
Okay. Okay, I'll answer that question, Rahul. So, okay, that is a complicated question. And the answer to that is yes and no, both. See, the good thing is that RDBMS systems are meant to handle only structured data, right? But these big data systems, a lot of times don't deal with structured data. They deal with unstructured data, okay? So a lot of times, but not always. So there can be times where you can use RDBMS to handle your big data kind of applications, and there can be times where you would choose to do something else, okay? But essentially the whole idea of big data is to deal with very, very large amount of data and the way you want to deal with that data, right? So we call it usually big data when we have millions and millions of rows being generated like every minute, right? That's when it becomes big data. And such data is very expensive to store in RDBMS system. So you usually don't store that kind of data in RDBMS. So you use other methods to work on those kinds of data sets. So it depends. What kind of big data are you dealing with? Okay. Okay, so Rajesh, your question will get answered very, very soon. Don't worry about it. So as we learn SQL, you'll start understanding how and when it can be used, right? But just to give some context, let me talk about it a little bit. Okay, so all the companies, right, that you guys will be targeting in the future, or any company for that matter, has one of these RDBMS systems that are storing the company's data. So let's take an example. Let's take the example of Flipkart. Okay. So Flipkart will have, maybe Oracle as their underlying RDBMS system, and all the information regarding, let's say, customers and products will be stored in this database, right? So think of it like this: when we have such a big company, we need things organized very well. So you never rely on different files to store data, right? You'll never store the data in Excel files, because different applications will be using this data, and all applications will not be easily be able to get the data from Excel. Think about it like this. Let's say if I want to create an Excel of 1 lakh rows or 1 million rows, what happens? What do you experience when that happens? If you try to even open up a Excel sheet of that sort. So a lot of you would agree with me, it starts hanging. Okay, it starts hanging, which is a big problem. Okay, so we cannot have things slow down when we are dealing with data applications in real time. Okay, let's say somebody is using a phone to pull some data through their Android app, and let's say if the data is being fetched from an Excel sheet, it will take like ages, and the person will itself delete the app only, right? They'll not even stick to the app anymore. So the idea is these RDBMS help you to manage this data in a very efficient manner. Your queries become very, very simple to write, and at the same time, it becomes very simple and very fast to get the data that you need. Okay. So again, there was one more question about banks using RDBMS. Absolutely, banks rely on RDBMS, and all these different companies, provide different kinds of security features. So the banks can choose their form of database that they want to go with, and these databases are essentially with the bank only. They are not with some other company, so the bank can totally control them. And if the bank wouldn't have these, the bank will never be able to manage the massive amount of data that the bank deals with. They have to have some kind of RDBMS system. Then only they'll be able to save all the transactions, customer information, account information, and so on, right? So yes, they are pretty safe. They are very secure, right? They are stored in stored in a company servers, right? And there are various ways to make them even more secure. You can have different kinds of security engineers that add additional layers of security on top of your SQL. But the basic reason why we learn about SQL is, anywhere you go, the data of an organization will always reside in some or the other RDBMS system. There is no organization that I know of that doesn't store data in RDBMS. And if a data is being stored in RDBMS, then they need people who know SQL or who know SQL query who can fetch the data for them whenever they want to do some kind of reporting. Okay, great. All right, let's move on with the topic. And if there are any questions that are pending, I'll take them towards the end of the session. Okay, great. So now let's talk about the different types of SQL. Okay, so by now everybody's aware of what is SQL and what is the difference between RDBMS and SQL. So RDBMS is a way of storing data, is a way of managing data, right? It's a software that manages data, right? And SQL is a language that works on top of this RDBMS to fetch the data, manipulate the data, store the data, whatever you want to do. Okay, so this SQL is broken down into 3 different pieces, right? So we call these 3 pieces as DDL, DML, and DCL. Okay, so let's quickly understand what these 3 mean. So DDL is data definition language. Okay, so there are certain kinds of SQL queries that you write for defining your data, okay, or for defining your tables and for defining your database. So the idea is that the queries that are responsible for creating the data, okay, making some changes to the data. So when I say making changes, I'm not talking about adding data and removing data. I'm talking about, let's say, adding a new column to the table or removing a column from the table. So that's what I mean by altering. Okay, and the last part is, being able to eliminate the whole table from the database. Okay, so the kind of SQL queries which are responsible for defining data are termed as data definition language, right? And the examples, like I talked about, the SQL query which is responsible for creating or altering or deleting the data come under data definition language. Then we come to the second one and the most important one, which is data manipulation language. Okay, so just few things. While I'm talking, it'll be there'll be a break or in Discord if I start answering questions in the middle. So let's keep till the end of the PPT, till the end of the slide that I'm covering, and then you guys can ask the questions that you have. Okay, so next we'll talk about data manipulation language, right? So data manipulation language is set of commands that are used for maintaining and querying the database, right? So what we mean by that, so if you want to fetch some data from your database, you use data manipulation language, right? And if you want to, let's say, store some data. So again, when I say store, I'm not talking about creating a table. I'm talking about feeding data on a table that already exists. Because if you're trying to create a table, then it becomes data definition language. Okay, so manipulation is feeding things, right? And lastly, we have data control language. So data control language is commands that help you to control, to control things at an administrative level. So what I mean by that is, let's say the kind of queries that you would write to, let's say, give right to a certain customer or to a certain employee in the company. So let's say you join Flipkart, right? Now you will be needing access to the database. So there will be a database administrator who will write data control language to provide access to you guys, right? And do things at a commit level, right? So these are the kind of things that most of you, if you are targeting a career in data science, will not have to worry about it. I personally have never written any data control language. So until and unless anybody is targeting jobs around database administrator, right? The people who control the database, right? Provide access to different people, take care of any errors that are coming in the table and so on. Those are the kind of people who work on data control language, okay? But otherwise, most of us will actually stick to data manipulation language. Most of us will not even work with data definition, right? Why? Because when you join a company and you work with an employer, there's a very good chance, more than 90% of chance, that the tables will already be existing, right? All you will have to do is fetch the data from these tables, right? But I said 90%. There will be 10% of times where you'll have to create new tables. So let's say you are forming a new kind of information, right? And you want to store it. So you'll have to write the data definition language to store that new kind of table in your company. Okay, let's say a new kind of product is launched and you want to store information regarding that, right? So those are the 3 parts: DDL, DML, and DCL. Okay, and our focus in this chapter will be 90% on DML, like I said, and 10% on the DDL, and DCL will cover 0%, right? It's just for giving you guys the idea what all different kinds of SQL that we have, right? But now if you guys have any questions, it's a good time to take them. So now you can tell me. Okay, So Sahil asks, does DML include add and remove? So when you say add and remove, are you talking about adding and removing columns? If that's the case, then no, then that will come under data definition, right? So, okay, let's try to understand the core difference between these two and why something like add and remove can create confusion. Okay, so when we say add and remove, we are changing the structure of our table. Think of it like this. Why? Because you are either adding a totally new column or you are eliminating some column. Okay, so you are making changes to the structure of the table that is there. So when you do any changes to the structure of the table, then that comes under data definition language. But if you are adding data, removing data, by adding data and removing data, I'm saying the actual data. So let's take an example. Let's say we are dealing with student information. So there's a table, right? And the way table is defined is there is name, there is roll number, and there is subject, for example. Okay, and if you want to add a new student's information, then that will be DML because you are adding a new row to the data. Okay, but let's say if you want to add a new column, let's say you want to store the teacher's information, then that will be DDL because now you are changing the structure of the table. Is it clear to everybody now, the difference between DDL and DML? Okay, so Shubham, again, I would like to correct you. So Shubham says it is something like updating the database. Again, that's not entirely correct. Okay, because let's say if I'm removing a row from the table, that is also updating, right? But it is not DDL, it is DML because I'm changing the data. But if I'm changing the structure of the table, then that is DDL. I hope it's clear now. Great. Any questions that I might have missed out? Anybody?
Sir, there is a doubt from Haripriya.
Okay.
What is the difference between removing and deleting data?
Okay, great. So when you talk about removing and deleting data, okay, see, essentially they mean the same thing, right? But when we talk about this in terms of SQL, we have different ways of defining these attributes. So let's say if I am eliminating any row of the data, right? Or eliminating any data point from your Excel sheet, apart from the headers, okay, apart from your column names, then it is simply a delete operation, right? And it's an update operation, okay? But if I am eliminating an entire column, right, I am making sure that this column does not exist anymore, then I'm making changes to the structure of the data, then that becomes DDL. But essentially, if you are using the word remove and delete, they can be used interchangeably, but the context is important. If you are doing a removal on the structure of the data, then it's a DDL, right? But if you're doing a removal on the actual data, then it's a DML, or on any row of the data, then it's a DML. Okay. I hope this is clear to you now. Okay, so this will get more and more clear as we go along. So next, what we are going to do is we are going to dive deeper into DDL, right? So you guys will understand even better what we are doing, what are the kind of different things that we're doing in the DDL part, and how is it different from the DML part. Okay. Okay, I think we are getting a lot of questions here. So before moving forward, let's spend a little bit of time before we go forward. Let's see if there are any relevant questions that we can answer. But if there's a question that can be answered later on also, then I'll skip it for now. Okay. Let me go through some of them. Okay, so Sahil asks, does DCL include commit and revoke? Yes, those are the kind of things that are included in DCL, right? But they are beyond the scope of the lecture that we are covering right now. So I'll not go any deeper into, making you understand what do we mean by commit and revoke. We'll not go there, right? Okay, let me see some more questions. Okay, so Rajesh asks, does updating and editing and creating have different properties to use it? Rajesh, I'm not so sure about your question, but from what I'm understanding, okay, see, the word update, edit, remove, delete, right? A lot of times these words can be used interchangeably, right? Manipulate, delete, edit. But I will give you the exact words which are used in the correct context. Okay. So when a kind of change is being applied to the DDL, the word is different, and when a change is being applied or update is applied to DML, the word is completely different. So as we go along, I'll make this clear to you how it is different. But for now, all you need to understand is what is meant for what. Okay. Only thing that you guys need to understand the difference between DDL and DML for now, till this point in the lecture, is DDL is about making changes to the structure of the data, which means if you are wanting to add new columns, remove some columns. Okay. And DML is about adding and removing rows. Okay. It has nothing to do with columns. So columns define the structure. Why they define the structure? Because they define what information is stored. And rows simply are a collection of the different data points, right? So if you are just changing the data points, it's data manipulation language. But if you are making changes to the structure of the data, then it's data definition. Okay. So creating a new table altogether also comes under DDL because you are defining a new table, right? Making changes to an existing table, making changes to the column of an existing table, that is also DDL, right? Removing a column, that is also DDL. But if you want to add a new row or remove a row, then that is DML. Okay. You want to add data to an already created table. Let's say the table is defined. You know what all columns are there and there is no data, and you try to insert data, then that will be DML. Okay. Great. Okay. So now we'll move forward. Okay. So now we'll talk about data definition language, and we'll go a little deeper into it. So there are three kinds of major operations. So by no means I'm saying these are the only operations performed under DDL, but these are the three major operations performed under DDL, right? And like we talked about, the DDL deals with creation, the structural aspects of your table. Okay. So when we deal about structural aspects of a table, there are three things typically that can happen. Okay. First is you create something. Second is you alter something. And third is you drop something. Okay. So let me try to tell the difference between all of this and try to explain a little more what do we mean by each of these. Okay. So the very first thing is create. Okay. So what we mean by create is when we want to create a new table altogether. Okay. And the way it is done is, okay, now this is important. So now we are talking of syntax, right? Now we'll actually be writing a query. Okay. So before we go into writing queries, let me share something with you guys very quickly. Okay, so I'll be sharing a link with you guys and you guys can open it. So basically there's a website called as W3 Schools, right? And they have a simulator, okay? So emulator for writing queries. So what that means is in this chapter, since our focus is on learning the SQL language, we will not waste any time on downloading any RDBMS system and then working on top of it, right? Because our major agenda for this class is to not download RDBMS in your own systems, but rather to learn the SQL language. So the best way, in my opinion, the way to do that is don't worry about any kind of installations, directly run the queries on a tool or a platform. So the link that I've shared with you guys, it's a platform for, okay, let me send the link. Okay, I just shared the link. Everybody can open it up, right? And keep it handy with you guys, right? And I'll show you how to use it. Okay, so just to make this clear one more time, just to make the context clear, we will not be focusing on downloading any of the RDBMS. We'll not download Oracle or MySQL, right? Or Postgres. Our focus will simply be on writing queries and understanding how you query a database, right? How do you make changes to a database? How do you create a database table and so on? Okay, we don't want to go into the administrative stuff. So when you download an RDBMS, you have to do a lot of administrative stuff. You have to set passwords, set usernames, right? Then get some data and put it in. Over here, what we'll do is in this simulation that I've provided you guys, can you see my screen where I've opened up this simulator? Is this visible to you guys? Okay, let me share it. Just give me a second. Okay, let me know if it's visible now. Yeah, great. And everybody is able to open this link also? So now we'll do it practically, and all of you can also execute the queries, right? Right with me. But just a word of caution, this tool will always be with you guys. It's not a subscription tool. You can use it anytime. If you guys feel that you are, chasing a runaway train where my lecture is going ahead and you were still struggling with the previous query, I would say, come back to the lecture, be with me, attend the lecture. The recording is going to be with you guys, and you can always practice later on, right? So if you're able to write with me, good enough. In case you feel you're getting left behind, don't worry too much about it. A lot of these things are about practice, right? I cannot teach you entire SQL in just this one chapter, right? You'll have to put your own efforts as well. So even if you don't grasp everything right here in this session, go back, learn by yourself. What I mean by learn by yourself, go through the session again, go through the recording, right? And you will always have this tool and the set of tables that we are going to use, right? And you can always keep writing the query, right? And keep practicing, keep making mistakes and keep practicing. So over here also, I will intentionally make mistakes sometimes so that you guys get clarity on how to write SQL, okay? Because there are some common mistakes that people make in the beginning, right? And there is a learning curve. When I learned it, it took me good amount of 2-3 weeks to get a good grasp of SQL. So it takes time, right? But I'll try my best to make it clear to you guys and to make the concepts of writing SQL as clear as they can be. Okay, I'll try my best. All right, so let me jump back to the chapter one more time. Is the screen of PowerPoint visible to you guys? Can you see data definition language? No? Okay, I think multiple shares cannot be done. Let me share again. Okay, great. So anybody who has been lagging behind in any of the previous topics, so all of them were conceptual. You can always go back to the video and you'll understand them, right? And in the end also we'll answer some questions. But right now we are doing some hands-on work. So come with me, be a part of this now, right? Don't lag behind in the previous thing. Let's talk about data definition language and let's try to cover it up. Okay, so we'll start off with the create. So everybody should be clear with what create query is meant for. So create query is meant for creating a new table in your system, as simple as that. Okay, so whenever we want to create a new table, we'll make use of create query. Okay, and the way its syntax is defined is, let's look at the syntax very carefully. So firstly, we'll simply write the word create, then we'll write the word table, right? Why are we writing the word table? Because we want to let the system know that what we want to create is a table. Okay, so we'll say create table, and then you'll use the name of the table that you want to create. Okay, so table underscore name. So just a few rules to keep in mind over here, right? The reason why I put an underscore between table and name and I don't put a space, because languages don't work very well with spaces, right? Because they usually interpret space as a different semantic or a different piece of semantic, right? So if you write table and space name, your system will not be able to interpret, or SQL will not be able to interpret that you're talking about just one thing, right? So it's always good to either not put anything, right? Have something continuous, or put an underscore if you really want to separate the different words out. Okay. Next, we define all the different columns that are there in the table. Okay. So the way you do that is you simply name the column. So for example, I write over here column 1. So the name of the column will come over here, right? And after that, your data type associated with that column. Now this is important. So if you guys remember in Excel, there's a drop down available in the home screen where you get the option of defining what kind of column a particular data is. So is it related with numbers? Is it related with string? Is it general, and so on? So same thing you have to do over here, right? You have to define, or you have to tell the system what kind of data are you storing. Okay, so we'll walk through what are the different types of data types available. We'll do that, don't worry, right? So now let's try to jump into the practical and try to see this. Okay, so one very common doubt that we get from people is about, do we have to write everything in uppercase or lowercase, and what are the rules around it? So there are absolutely no rules around it, right? So the reason is that SQL is not a case sensitive language. Okay, So you can write these important words, right, which are create and table in blocks also and in lowercase also. It does not matter. Okay. So, and I'll show that to you in practical right over here, right? So let's start by creating a table. So let's see how a table is created. So very first thing you all know is to write the word create. Okay. So this is the simulator. So I'll write the word create, and after that I'll write the word table. So you can see already I'm writing in small, and we'll see later, does that lead to any error or not? So we write create table. Okay. And after create table, we'll write the name of the table. So let's call the name as students. Okay. So we are creating a students table, right? And after this, next thing what we are going to do is we are going to define the different columns that are there, right? And their data types. Okay. So now you can think of it like this. Everything about columns goes inside these brackets. But to make my code look better, what I'll do is I'll come to the next line. Even if you write everything in one line, there is no mistake. You're absolutely allowed to do that. Okay. But to make my code look more readable, right? To make my query language look more readable, I'll come to the next line. Okay. And I'll start writing the name of the different columns that I want. So can anybody help me with this? What would be the different kinds of columns I would like to have with the students table? Anybody? Okay, somebody is very enthusiastic. Right away started with marks. Okay, I think some common answers that we see are roll number and name. So let's go with that. So we'll first define roll number. Okay, so let's say roll underscore number, right? Next thing, what do we have to do? We have to define the data type of this roll number. So the data type of roll number will be integer. Okay. So why integer? Because roll numbers can take the form of numbers, right? And integer is one of the ways that you can do it, right? You can do it much better, right? You can also store it as a different form which does not let it take negative values. But over here, I'm not thinking too much about it, right? So integers is a valid way to use it. So I'll write integer over here. Now I'll put a comma, okay? And after putting the comma, right, I'll define the next column. So my next column is, let's say, name. Okay. And with name, now I have to make this name. Can I make name of integer type? We can't, right? So name has to be of some other type, right? A type which can handle alphabets also, right? It can handle alphabets because integer can entirely handle only numbers and not alphabets. So if we want our code to handle alphabets, the way to do that is varchar. Okay. But there's one extra condition to varchar. You cannot use varchar like an integer just by writing the word integer. Okay. Why? Because varchar wants you to, in addition, define how many characters do you want to use in your varchar. Okay. They want to, because, so the reason why you have to do this is an entire column will be allocated to this task. Okay. And when an entire column is allocated to this task of creating names, the computer will start using some memory. Okay. Now we don't want computer to have either very less memory or too much of memory. We would want to define some legit memory value, right? Such that most of the names will easily fit into this and the space won't be less and it won't be like that too much of space is getting wasted as well. Okay. So I'll take this number as, let's say, 30, for example. Okay. So what I mean, 30 characters. So it's a safe assumption, right? That within 30 characters, my names will get defined. Okay. So this is my query. And now let's try to run this and see if this works or not. Okay. So by the way, before we do that, I just want to make you clear that we have all these different tables which are available in our database over here in the right corner, you guys can see. Okay. These are the different tables. So if I run this query, a new table should get created, right? So now think again, this is a DDL, data definition language, because it is defining a new structure in my database, a new table in my database, right? And that structure has two columns, roll number and name. Okay, so let's see if this works. Let's see. So once I have this, all I have to do is I have to click on run SQL. Okay, and what happens if you see over here at the bottom, it says that you have made changes to the database. Okay, so what does that mean? That a database got created with the name students. Okay, a new table got created, right? And you can see already there's a 0 with it. So what does that 0 mean? That there are no records inside that student table, which means there is nothing inside the student table right now. Okay, only the structure of the table has been defined. Data has not been inserted. So let me check with you guys quickly. If I want to insert data into the table, will that be DDL or DML? Okay, I think everybody is understanding it well now. So most of you said DML, and you guys are absolutely right about it, because now we are inserting rows. We are adding actual data. So whenever you are adding actual data, you are doing a manipulation, data manipulation language, right? Until unless you are making any changes to the structure, it's not a DDL, it's a DML. Okay. So now let me run this query in a little different way. So just to show you guys that your running it everything in just one line wouldn't have mattered. And also I'll make one more change. I'll make these caps this time, just to show that it does not really make a difference. Okay. So now let's see what happens. So we'll run this. Okay. So do you see an error occurred? Okay. And what does the error say? The error says that one table students already exists. So now what is happening? In this database, I am trying to push another table with the exact same name students. So my RDBMS is throwing me an error and telling me that, you cannot do this. Why? Because there's already a table with that name. So maintaining uniqueness is very important, right? Think about it. If the different table names are not unique and you call out any table, which table should get called, right? So it's very important that these names are unique. Okay. And that's why this gave you an error. Okay. Okay. Somebody says that there is a missing colon in the end. So I just want to make you guys clear. This colon is something which is not uh, 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 it is not a mandatory thing, right? You can skip this. The semicolon is totally optional. Okay. Even if you don't put it, your query will run fine. Your query will not run with any errors. So what will we do to make this change over here? We'll just make this students_1. Okay. Okay. Can I do students space 1? Is that valid? Okay. Let's see if it is valid or not by running it. And it says there is a syntax error near 1. Okay. So it will not tell you the exact error all the time, but it's telling you, it's giving you some kind of, placement of the error, where the error is occurring. So the reason error is occurring is because I put a unexplainable space, right? So what this space makes the computer believe is students is something different and 1 is something different, which is not really the case. Okay. So we either put an underscore or we put nothing. Even students1 is okay, right? So I'll put students1 without the underscore over here and I'll run this, right? And you can already see that another table called students1 gets created. Okay. Is this clear to everybody? Anybody has any questions around this? So just to show you one more example, I'll create one more mistake. I'll call the students2, but over here in roll number, I'll not put a space, and let's see what happens. Okay, so something strange happened this time. What happened? Students2 actually got created. Okay, so now let's check this out and see. So right now, if you click on students2, nothing will come. Why? Because there is no data stored inside it, right? So it will not show you anything. All right, but with columns, the logic of having a space did not really create an error. Okay, so there are certain places where the error gets created and there are certain places where it's okay and certain places where it's not okay. So clearly when you're defining the name of the table, it is not okay, right? But while you're creating a new column, it came out fine. But again, advice is don't use spaces, right? It is always good. It's a good coding practice, no matter what language you're doing, even if you're doing something like Python or R later at a later stage in the courses that you do with us, right? The idea is do not use spaces. Always use underscores to separate words, right? It's a good and healthy practice. Okay. So we've already talked about one of the DDLs, which is create, right? Now let's talk about one DML syntax also, right? So this is something that should be covered later on, but just to complete this thing, I'll give you one DML also. So we'll talk about inserting data. Okay, so we'll try to insert one row in my students one, right? So okay, let me do that in students. Okay, so the way we do that is we simply write insert into, right? Next thing, can anybody guess what should we write? Anybody who has no clue at all, who has no background of SQL, do you want to tell what should we do? Correct. So we should write the word of name of the table, right? Which, so that is, we should write students. Okay. What next? What should we do next? Okay, so now I'm getting some answers from people who already have some background. Okay, so we'll do this. So insert does the operation in a row-wise manner, which means you're inserting rows one after the other. So what do we do? So after doing this, we write values. Okay, so the values is a way of letting your system know that you'll now be adding the data. And the way you do that is inside the bracket, you give the different values for that row. So my roll number, I want to, let's say, give 1, and the name I want to give, let's say, let's take a name, let's say Suraj. Okay, so let's run this and see, do we get any error? Okay, there's an error and it says no such column Suraj. Okay, very strange error. So let's try to understand why this error occurred. So the reason why this error occurred is whenever you are dealing with varchar or string variables, you have to always enclose them in a single inverted comma. It's very important that you enclose them in single inverted comma. Okay, so we'll close this Suraj with the single inverted comma over here. And now if we run, I think we should not get an error. Let's see if we still get an error. Okay, what do you see in the result part? You have made changes to the database, rows affected 1, right? Which means data has been added. Now, one thing is very important here. You have to maintain the sequence. So, in your data, roll number comes first and then name comes. So you have to add the information of roll number first and then of the name. So by doing so, you are simply adding a new row to your data. Okay, now let's look at student. Does this reflect? So just click on students over here and you'll see that roll number 1 and name Suraj. This is the data in your data now. Okay, so insert is something that we'll look at a later stage also. Right now, it was done just so that this section of creating a table and at least having some data in that table is complete, right? But we'll move on with DDL. We'll try to see more of DDL and then again, we'll come back to the DML. In the DML, we'll do the insert part, okay? Great. Okay, so while I'm teaching, I see a lot of administrative questions are being rolled around, which is something that which hampers the quality of learning, right? So for once and all, let me give you some context of the administrative doubts that you guys are raising. There is no fee of anything, right? You just have to write the exam. The exam is free of cost. That was mentioned in the beginning of the session, right? All you need to do is you need to take the attendance part, right? You need to provide the feedback and you just need to take care of some things, right? And you can attempt the exam. That's all that is required. And attending the exam will generate your certificate. So this is not a exercise of teaching you something and taking money from you to attend the exam. Nothing like that is going on. You can learn, you can do your learnings, and then you can give your exam. It's all free of cost. Okay. So now let's come back to the session. Let's come back to the questions and the topic that we are covering. Okay, let's not deflect from this due to the administrative reasons. Okay, great. So I'll jump back to the slides. Okay, so we'll move on to the next DDL topic, which is alter. Okay, again, I'll take a small example. We'll again not go too deep. We'll not practice too much around it, right? Because our main focus is on DML, right? DML is what's the most important part. We are covering a little bit of DDL. It's important sometimes, but the idea is we are creating foundation for you guys to do the exploration on your own later on, right? We'll give you the concepts, we'll give you the understanding around these concepts, right? And later on, you'll be able to pursue this topic very easily if you want to go deeper and learn this, right? Okay, so with that, let's go to alter. So the idea with alter is, okay, now I have thrown a new word, alter. So now if you guys remember, till previous part, there were a lot of questions around the word update, manipulate. What is the difference? So the difference, the way SQL is making difference in these things is, alter is the word which is used to change the structure of your table, which means in data definition language, when you're making a change, when you're adding a new column or removing a column from an existing table, the way you do that is using alter. Okay, so you run alter and the changes will happen. All right, so let's see the syntax of alter deeply. Let's go to turn our heads back to the practice area of W3 schools. Okay, so before we go there, just a quick check with all of you. Give me a quick yes or no if you're able to execute the queries with me so far. If you're able to execute the create query with success. And it's perfectly okay to say no, right? Because see, you have the recording in the end. You can always go back, learn it again and do the needful. I'm just asking to get an idea as to how many people are catching up, how many are left behind. That's all. Okay, great. So I think a lot of you are able to run it with me in parallel. That's great. Now we'll move on to alter. Okay, so let's see what all can we do with alter. So we'll try to perform two operations. We'll try to perform an operation of adding a column, and we'll try to perform an operation of removing a column from a table. Okay, so let's see how that can be done. So first thing is, we start with the keyword, which is alter. So just to make it clear, I'll use caps, but otherwise you're free to do whatever you want to do. So we'll write alter, and after alter, we'll write the name of the table that we want to alter. So the name of the table is, let's say, we want to make alterations to the student table. So we'll say alter students. Okay. Now, next, what we'll do is, we'll say, so now again, choice is on you. You can do this in the next line, or you could have done it in the same line by adding a space, right? So totally up to you. So I want to make my code look clean. So that's why I'm going to the next line. And now I'll say add column. Okay. And now I'll add the name of the new column that I want to add. So till now we are capturing the roll number and the name of the students, correct? So now let's say we also want to capture the, let's say, age, let's say, okay? So how do we do that? So we'll simply say age, okay? Is this good enough? Can we stop here? Or should we do something more? Okay, perfect. So a lot of you are able to point out, so that we'll add the data type, right? So that is important. So we'll say that it is integer, right? So we need to add a data type. Then only our query gets complete. So let's run this and see, do we get any errors? So add also, let me make it capital, because again, add is a keyword kind of a thing, right? So let's run this and see if this works fine. Okay, and we get an error. So it says could not prepare statement. So error near students. Okay, so the error is the fact that I did not tell what I'm trying to alter. So basically I have to tell I'm trying to alter a table. Okay, so I'll put alter table students. Now let's see if this works fine. Okay, so again it says there is some error, and this time it says the error is occurring near this bracket or parenthesis. So I think the error is happening because I don't need to add the word column. So let's see if that's the case. So now what I'm doing is I'm simply saying alter table students, and then I'm doing an add and adding the information about my new column. So let's see if this works. Okay, again it says an error. Let's quickly check what this error could be about. Let me see. What could have gone missing? We've added alter, we've added the name table, we've added the column and the data type. Okay, I think the error is because we are okay. So I think the comma is meant not for differentiating between age and integer, but the comma is meant for separating different columns. Okay, so just by doing age and integer, I think things should work fine. Let's see with bracket first, because we initially had the brackets. Okay, again it says syntax error around this, so let me try to remove this and see what happens. Okay, and it works now. So typically when you're adding a new column, you need to put in the name of the column and with the space specify the data type. If you remember, that's exactly what we did in create as well, right? We put the comma to separate different columns and do not put a comma between the data type and name of a column. Okay, I hope this error is clear to everybody. Okay, and once we do that, a new column gets added to the students. Okay, so now if you want to check out students, you can click on this and see, right? And we see that there's one Suraj and age, and one very unique thing has happened, that age has null, and it's very obvious. The reason is when you're adding a new column, there is no information about this column yet, right? So what database does by itself is it adds a null value, and null is a signifier of the fact that there is no value added yet. Okay, so this null is added automatically. We'll see how to handle nulls later on again, once we go towards at a later stage of the course, right? Right now we don't have to worry too much about this null part. But any questions till now? Any questions about alter and add? Okay, somebody asks why no bracket. Okay, so let's try to explore this further, why we messed up the bracket. So now I already know that my students has the name, age, and one more column has been added, which is age, correct? So now let's do another thing. Let's try to add this time 2 columns and let's see what happens. Okay, so we'll simply say alter table students add. Now we'll add 2 columns together, okay, in one go. So let's say the 2 columns that we are adding is, any suggestions for the columns? Anybody? So let's say subject is 1. So subject, and we'll make the subject as varchar. So we'll make this a varchar. Again, let's say 30, just to be safe, right? And now we'll add another column called as, okay, somebody says gender, good enough. So we'll say gender, and again after gender we'll add varchar. This time we'll limit it because we know male and female both are around 6 characters. So just to be safe, I'll add 7. Let me not waste too much of space. Now let's run this and see, does it run or does it require any parentheses, right? And that might give us some answer along the direction of why parentheses were added or not added. So let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so what does it say? One error near the comma. Okay, now let's see if we add the brackets, does it help? And again we get the error, and this time we get the error around the brackets. Okay, so one thing is that whenever you're making these additions, you're not able to make them in one go, okay, from what it seems, right? The other thing is, if it's really an isolated operation, the need of the brackets automatically goes away, right? So when we were doing the create, we were adding multiple things together clubbed, right? And at that time the bracket was important to encapsulate the whole concept. Right now over here we can skip it and do it in this fashion, right? But if there's anything more to alter, we'll discover it later on, right? For right now we just want to get an understanding. So just to make this discussion complete, let me also run remove once. Okay, so just like we did add, let's see if there's something called as remove or not. Okay, and what we'll do for that, we'll write the word remove. Okay, and we'll try to write one of the column names. So let's say we try to write age. Okay, and let's see if this works or not. Okay, so we see that there's an error near remove. So from what it seems, remove is not really a keyword or the right word to do this. So the right word to do this is actually drop. So again, some background into a little more syntax. So whenever you want to get rid of something, the word is not remove or delete, it's rather drop. Because think about it, the word delete becomes relevant when you are deleting rows of data, or let's say any data inside the table. But when you want to eliminate the entire column, the makers of SQL or the makers of RDBMS systems did not want any confusion to arise because of this. So they created a unique word called as drop for this purpose. So drop, what will do? It will drop the column. Okay. So now let's run this and see if this works. Okay, it says some error is there. Let's see what is the error. Does our student have the age? Let's quickly check. Okay, age column is there. So we'll go into the syntax of drop one more time. Let's see. So we are doing alter table and we are altering the students table, and now we are trying to drop a column. So let's quickly make sure we are doing the syntax right. Okay, so now with add, if you guys remember, when we were adding, right, we simply created the new variable, the new column, which was, let's say, age, and we simply added the whatever data type was associated with age, right? So, but from what it turns out, when you're doing a drop, it's important to specify the fact that you are planning to drop a column. Okay, the reason for that is add exists only for adding newer information, right? But the idea of drop exists. The word drop can be used in multiple scenarios. So to eliminate the entire table also we use drop. Okay, and to eliminate certain columns also we use drop. So with drop, it's important to specify what are you really dropping. Okay, so after writing drop, you have to also write the word column and then write the word age. So let's see if this works. Okay, I think there is still some error occurring. Not quite sure what this error is. Okay, let me keep it cut with me so that I don't have to write this again. Okay, age is there. So let's try something else like roll number and see what happens. Okay, I think there's some error occurring. Okay, we'll figure this out as we go along, what might be the reason. But okay, so Anusha is saying, could it be because of the data type? So no, so the error, I strongly believe it's not because of the missing data type. So the reason is, when you're creating something new, it's important to specify what you're adding, what kind of information you're adding. But when you're removing a column, it's not really necessary to specify what is the type of column that you are eliminating. Okay, so it's perfectly okay that you are eliminating whatever column it is without specifying what is the type of that column. Okay, so okay, so again, Rahul also has one suggestion which I feel might not really work. So Rahul suggests, why don't we put the name of the column in quotes? So the reason why we shouldn't put it in quotes is because in other languages like Python, which are proper languages, your suggestion would have been perfectly fine. But in SQL, quotes are used only specifically for handling the SQL only handling the string variables, right? String literals. So if I want to insert a name, that name needs to go inside that. But anything related to the table, you need not specify that it's a name of something, because table structure is already there. So with respect to table, the word roll number is very clear that it's the name of the column. So you don't really have to do that. Okay, so somebody suggests semicolon. I'm doubtful if that's what will do the trick, but let's check. Okay, no, it's not that, it's something else. But okay, I'll figure it out and I'll tell you guys what it could be. So for now, let's not bother too much about it, right? Let's move on. So we'll answer this by the end, right? We'll do a lookup and we'll answer this. What could be the case, right? But the idea is that alter is being used to alter the definition of your table. Okay, and lastly you have drop. Okay, so partially you have experienced drop. Why I say partially? Because we were right now trying to drop a column, right, which did not work, which we'll come back to it later on. But the idea is that you can eliminate the entire table from your database also, right? So now again, think of this elimination clearly. Okay, I'll ask you guys a question and you can answer me. If I'm eliminating the entire table from my database, right, is it DDL or DML? Okay, that's correct. It's DDL. Why? Because the entire structure will be gone. But now think of it like this, that for a given table, right, let's say I had inserted 100 rows and all of those rows were wrong. They turned out to be wrong for some reason. So now what I need to do is I need to eliminate everything. So now what should I do? Should I just delete the rows in that table, or should I drop the entire table or delete the entire structure of the table? What should I do? What would be the right thing to do? Okay, somebody says entire table. Somebody says row delete. Okay, looking for more answers. Okay, so correct. Okay, so the idea is I don't need to eliminate the entire structure. Why? Because I can start feeding new rows to the same structure, the correct rows. Why should I eliminate the entire structure? I should just delete the rows that are there. So here is where the distinction between drop and delete comes. Like I said, the word drop is used when you're doing some kind of big alteration with the table itself, right? And delete is used when you're trying to delete some rows. So delete is for DML and drop is for DDL. Okay, so now we'll do a drop for the entire table itself. So let's see how that works. Okay, let me know if you're able to see my screen. So we'll simply write drop table, and the table that we are trying to drop, let's say, is students1. So let's see if this works. Okay, can you see the students1 is gone from your section, right? After students, we directly have students2. Okay, so that is how you drop the entire table. So basically, whenever you have created a structure which you don't need anymore, you can do the drop. But again, a word of caution. So this is a very prominent question asked in interviews. Okay, so be careful of it. They'll often ask you the difference between drop and delete. Okay, so the major difference between drop and delete is that delete is used to delete the rows of a table, right? It's part of DML, but drop it is part of DDL, and it is used to drop entire columns or entire tables itself. Okay, so be careful of this question when asked in the interviews, right? So just keep this in mind, right? It's an important one with respect to the interviews. Okay, great. So now I think we'll proceed forward with DML, right? And if we have any questions regarding DDL, we'll try to take them in the end. We'll try to keep some free 5 to 10 minutes towards the end of the session. Okay, so now let's quickly talk about DML. I believe everybody is clear with the whole idea of DML. It's used for manipulation. If you want to add new rows, if you want to query the data, if you want to update the data, right? Or if you want to delete the data. Now again, pay attention to two words. Can you guys now automatically see the difference between alter and update? Can anybody quickly tell me the difference between alter and update? What could it be? Even if you don't understand, take a guess from the entire understanding you have till this point. Anybody? Perfect. So clearly the word update is responsible for making any updates to the rows of your data. So let's say you added the roll number and that roll number is wrong. So you just want to change the roll number of a person. So what you'll use is the update and not the alter, because alter will be used to eliminate the entire column itself, right? Or add a new column, but update will be used to make changes. Similarly, insert will be used to add new rows, right, of data. And same thing goes for delete. You'll do delete to delete rows of data and drop to drop the entire table or drop the entire column. Okay, I think this is clear to everybody now. So now we'll jump on to the big game, which is the select clause. And now we'll be starting off with what really people call as knowing SQL queries. Okay, so select is something very, very important, right? And I think now all of you must pay very close attention to what are we going to do next. Okay, so select and where clause both are very, very important and very important to understand as well. So let's quickly go through a little bit of theory about them. The first thing is we'll learn about the syntax of select, and first we'll define what select is really meant for. So select is used to select certain columns from your table. So now forget about what you've done so far in the sense of having very small tables like, what we have already seen, like student, where you had 2 columns and merely 1 row. Actual real-time tables of organizations will have hundreds of different columns and millions of rows probably. Okay, they capture a lot of information. So when that is the case, you need a way to bring out data which is relevant to you, right? So right now I'm just trying to show you the importance of querying and the importance of the select query. So somebody has asked this question in the very beginning, but I hope it gets answered now. So the whole idea of select is that you should be able to, so let's say it's a table of hundreds and thousands of columns, okay? And your manager comes up to you and says, from this table, I just need very few information. I just want to know, let's say it's a student table with a lots of columns and you just want to know the names and grades of different students. Let's say that's all that is needed. So looking at this whole table to capture that data is very inefficient if you think about it, right? It's very inefficient because you'll have to cruise through multiple columns, and the desirable columns might not even be placed right next to each other. Maybe the roll number column is right in the beginning and name column is right in the end. So you'll have to scroll through the whole screen to check. It's very inefficient, right? So the best way to deal with this or to look into this data is to query this data with whatever you need. So right now we are learning the aspect of querying where we query certain columns which are needed. We are not thinking of in terms of rows at all. Be very careful about this. Okay, even though the word select might make you feel that, right? But the whole idea of select is selecting columns, selecting certain columns that you need. Okay, and the syntax is very, very simple. It's right there in front of your screen, and the syntax is select whatever columns you need, name of those columns separated by commas, and then you simply add a from and you mention the name of the table from which you are doing this selection. Okay, so there are 2 keywords over here if you think about it, the select word and the from word. Both are very, very important. So the select is responsible for selecting the different columns that you want. Okay, and from is responsible for selecting the table from which you want these columns. So it's very similar to English language if you think about it. It's written, and this is exactly what we mean by the structured part of the SQL. Okay, you have to write the select part first and then you write the from part for the table from which you want to select it. So you simply say select the column from the table. Okay, great. So now we'll try to run this query in actual and see how does it really work. Okay, we'll try to run this on our favorite go-to tool, which you all know by now is W3 Schools. So now let's forget about our students and students to table, right? Because they are merely they rarely hold any useful business insight or business value, right? So let's try to look into some complicated tables. So by now you guys already know the way to look into a table is by simply clicking on it over here. So let's just click on this and see what all do we have in this table, right? So this table, if you see over here, has all these different columns along with all these different rows, and we already know it has some 90 different columns. Okay, not 90 different rows, I'm sorry. Okay, and the number of columns you can see are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? So we have around 7. So now what do we need to do is we need to do some query. So now let's say all I require right now is just to look at a customer and the country from which this customer belongs to. Okay, just these two things is what I need. So what do I need to do to write a query of that sort? So all I'll do is I'll start with my select, because I want to select certain columns. So I'll say select customer ID. Okay, comma the other column, which is country. Okay, and then we'll write from, right, and then we'll write the name of the table that we are working with. Okay, and the name of the table I believe is customers. So I'm intentionally making a few mistakes here, or maybe jumbling things a bit, but I want to make sure you guys understand what happens with those. So let's run this and see what happens. So do you see no error occurred? It might be strange to a lot of people, right? But in SQL, like I said, things are not case sensitive. Okay, so over here, if you can see, instead of writing capital C, I wrote small c. Okay, and still it ran fine. Now let me make it capital C and see if it works. It still works. Okay, let's mess with it a little more. So if you have seen, I've already messed at one more place. When it displays, it shows you capital C, but when I'm querying it, I queried with only small c. Let's do something very random and see if it works. So let me make this O capital, M small, E capital, and R small, and I capital. Let's see if something weird like this will work. And it still works. Okay, so what do we know? It is case insensitive. Okay, it works. It does not matter how you write it. But let's try one more thing. Let's try to see something like this. If we separate customer and ID, and let's see what happens. Okay, now we get an error. Why? Because like I said, until and unless there is a valid explanation for a space that you're using, SQL will not understand this. IDBMS will not understand this. So over here, it does not understand what are these two entities, customer and ID. It only understands one entity, which is customer ID. Okay, so by now you've already learned this was small, you could have made it caps, right? And it's a good practice to make it caps. Okay, so all the keywords you should write in caps, and the rest of the things you should try to write it in small, because it highlights what all different keywords you are trying to use. That's a good practice. It's not a rule, it's a convention. Okay, great. So I think that's your select query. So let's dive a little deeper into select query. So now if you guys have already noticed, I'm not sure if you have noticed this by now, but when we click on a table, let's say suppliers, what this software is doing for you is it's actually executing a query only for you, if you think about it. Okay, and based on that query, some results are appearing. So everything in SQL is actually a query. Even when you want to look at the whole table without eliminating anything, that is also a query only. Okay, so now if I'm writing select star from the name of the table, what this star actually means is I don't care about certain columns. By star, I'm specifying that give me all columns that are there in my table. So if I do select star from suppliers, I'm sending out a message that in this table, give me all possible columns that are there. Is the concept of star clear to everybody? So think of it why this is important. So let's say you are ready to perform something on a table, but you have no idea what is there in that table. So a good practice will be to do a small check on this table to check what kind of data is stored in that table. So if you want to do that, you'll obviously have to look at all the different columns that are there. And to do that, you simply run a select star on the table and the whole data will be displayed in front of you. But now there's a small catch over here if you think about it. Let's identify what that small catch is. So right now there are 29 rows. It's not a big table. So now let's say you are dealing with industry level tables, which have millions of rows, right? So everything has a cost, remember that. If you're trying to fetch millions of rows, the cost of running this query is obviously higher, right? And your SQL will take more and more time to generate data, okay? But your intent over here was very small. Your intent was simply to have an idea of the data. You need not look at 10,000 rows of data. All you needed was to just look at a few rows and get some answers or get some understanding of the data. For that, you just ran the entire data. So to work with this, we have something called as So let me separate the different parts because it makes things easier. So select from this something called as limit. So the whole idea of limit is it will limit the number of rows that you get. So let me put 10 over here and let's see what do we get as an output. So when we run this, only 10 rows of data came out. Okay. So what does that mean? Now you can just get a small portion of your data. Just look at a small portion and get the requisite ID of the table. So now just by looking at these 10 rows, I can easily make up an idea that, you know, what is this data all about? Everybody clear with the concept of limit, star, and select? Any questions till this point? All good? Great. All right. Everybody able to execute the query also? Anybody who's lagging behind? Okay. So Ajit asks a very important question. So Ajit asks, is star really necessary? Do we really need to put that star in place? Okay. Good question. So let's try to execute and see if that's the case. So let's eliminate the star and run this. What happens? We get an error. So let me tell you why that star is important. So when you encounter the word select, so there are certain rules based on which this SQL is running. As soon as, so let's say whenever they are trying to process this query, whenever the SQL is processing this query, automatically when it reads the word select, it is expecting some column name to appear right after it. Okay. If it doesn't see that column name, it will give an error. Star is our way of saving time. What we could have done is we could have simply written the name of all the columns, but let's say the table has 1,000 columns, then it is very difficult to write the name of those 1,000 columns. So that's why we have something called a star existing, which makes sure that all columns are selected. Okay, it makes our life easier. So yes, star is important, and you have already seen that in practical by executing the query without star. So whenever you get these questions in mind, right, and if they seem like easy to check and execute, it's a very, very good and healthy practice to do it for yourself, right? It will make the concept clearer for you, because, you know, I'm sure you will be having a lot of questions when you start practicing. The best thing is do it. Just do it and see, does it work or not? And you'll have your answer. Okay, great. So I think we are clear with the way we are using select. There's just one part remaining to select, which is distinct. And let's try to dive into distinct as well. So now let's say in my data, I want to look at the different countries that are there in the customer data. So I want to see what all different countries are these customers coming from. So I'll simply do select country from customers and limit. Okay, let me not put a limit. Let me look at the all of the data. Okay, so I'll run this query and I'll get the country column with all the different values. So now what is the case? There are some 90 values. Now, how will I know what all is getting repeated, what all is not getting repeated? How can I make sure just to get only those names which are occurring only once? So, okay, let me repeat this. I think I'm not explaining this correctly. So I just want to look at the unique names of all the countries. I don't want to look at Germany repeating again and again, because my question is simply, what all different countries are people ordering from? So going through a data of 91, and right now it's just 91. Imagine a database of thousands. It is very inconvenient to go through these 1,000, right? So what we need to do is we need to come up with a smart way in which we can simply get all the different rows that are there in just one go. Okay, all the unique rows. So the keyword for that is distinct. So if you put select distinct, and after that you put the name of the column that you want to check, you should get all the columns occurring only once. So now if you see, none of the columns are repeating, and it's giving you the unique columns that are there. Is the usage of distinct clear to everybody? Any questions till this point? Otherwise, I'll move forward. Okay. So again, you can do some, experiments. I'll leave this up to you, right? You can always perform different kinds of experiments. So whenever you're querying, when I'm teaching, I want to teach you all the different aspects, right? Which means I'll show you all these things. But you can always take advantage of different things that you're learning and try to put them all in one query to do experiments. So for example, since you have already learned about the concept of limit, you can start trying to put limit with distinct and see what happens, right? Similarly, you can try to put star with distinct and see how it will react. So I'll not do these things for you. I'll leave them up to you for experiment and come up with conclusions as to what this really means. Okay, because there are, as you can see, if there are even 4 or 5 different concepts, the way you can use those combinations, the possibilities are a lot. Okay, so you need to explore all those different possibilities, and you know, you will always, when you're doing it in real time, there will come chances where you'll have to do those experimentations with multiple kinds of concepts, because that's how you would make a complex query, a real time complex query. Okay, so let me go back to the slides. Great. So I think these were the 3 concepts. I think all these 3 are clear, right? So now we'll move on. Okay, so Ajit is asking, how do we enter data after creating? Ajit, if you remember, we did the insert into query to enter the data. Do you remember? We had already covered this up. So we did the insert to enter the data inside our table, right? The insert into with the keyword values, and then we added the different kinds of values. Yeah. So by doing that, you can add that. But there are more complicated ways of performing inserts, more smarter ways, right? So for example, there are ways in which, let's say if you have a CSV file or an Excel file, you can directly upload it to the database. It is possible, right? But it's beyond the scope of context over here, beyond the scope of discussion here, because those things are not done through queries, right? Query is done once you have data in database. To add data to database, sometimes you can write a query through insert, right? And you can add, but let's say you want to insert 1000 rows. Now you cannot write 1000 insert values, right? It's very inefficient. So you have to do some workarounds. We'll not get into them, but there are ways. You should know there are ways to do that, right? Our focus right now is to do DML, which is select data, fetch data from a database, because majorly what all of us will be doing, or at least from an interview point of view also, the company is expecting that the data that they have, right? You should be able to pull relevant data out of it. You should be able to query data, and you should be familiar with the basic concepts of select and where clause, right? That's what they're expecting. So if we do this, you'll be good to go, right? So now next we'll cover the concept of where, which will be the last concept we'll be covering for today's session, right? So, okay, before we start, let me have a little bit of water. If anybody has any questions till now, you can ask. Okay, I think an important point has been raised, and it's important that we address this, right? So we are learning about SQL, right? And you know, a natural question is, since a lot of us over here are data science students, right, or budding aspiring data scientists, a natural question is, where does SQL really come into the picture over here? So remember, in a company or in an organization, your data science skills are kind of useless until and unless you really know how to pull the right kind of data, right? So that's where SQL comes into the picture. So when you're being hired, it's not like you'll be provided files of data on which you can run your machine learning operations or data analysis, right? You need to be able to pull that data from the right database system. So that is the reason why every data scientist should also know SQL, right? And a lot of times your different data frames, your different software systems like big data systems like Spark use SQL query only within that. So let's say if a company has data in big data in Spark, you can actually write SQL queries to fetch data, right? Underlying Spark will do everything faster, but over the surface, you can still write SQL queries. So knowing SQL queries will solve a lot of problems for you. In fact, you can write SQL queries within Python also. So you can connect your Python to some database system and straight away write the query from within Python to fetch the data, right? So that's why it's important for a data scientist to know SQL, okay? Because ultimately, if you don't have the data, how will you even perform data science operations? Make sense, right? So, okay, now we'll move on to the where clause, right? And we'll try to talk about it. So now, so far we have talked about how do we select columns, but now natural questions comes is how do we select certain rows from the data based on certain conditions. So the way we do that is using a where clause. Okay. So the syntax of where is fairly straightforward. So you do the select what you want to do. So every query. So now understand some things. When I say if I'm running a where clause, it doesn't really mean that I'll just simply write where and end of discussion. It's a structured query language, which means you have to follow a certain structure, and that structure dictates that your query always starts with select. After select, your from comes, which means you tell from which table do you want to do the select the columns. And then finally, you also tell now what are the different rows that you're looking for, or what is the kind of data that you want to pull. Okay, so let me take an example of this. Okay, with example, it becomes much clearer. So let's say I want to fetch from all the different list of students. I want to fetch the name of students. I want to fetch all the students who were present in the class. So let's say against the student, I'm maintaining an information called present and absent. Now, if I really want to select only the students who were present, I should be able to do that in my SQL query. And the way I can do that in SQL query is with the help of my where clause. Because in where, I can specify the condition based on which I want to filter the data. So for example, over here, the filtering is happening based on customer ID. And if we do this, only the customer whose ID is 1 will get selected and will be displayed. So right till this point, maybe the power of where might not be clear to you, but to make it clear, I'll give you guys more examples. Okay. And those examples will make things pretty clear. So let's pick one of the tables that you want to work with. So I think customer tables provides a lot of unique information to play around with. So we'll still stick to customer. So now quickly checking with you guys, what if I want to look into all the data points of the table customers? What query should I run? Can you quickly tell me? Anybody? Perfect. So a lot of you gave the answer. Select star from the table name, which is okay. So now again, you see, it's a simple query. I'm not taking the pain of writing things in different line because I know this is not my ultimate query. So let me not waste time. Let me write it in one go, get the data. So now I know I have customer ID, customer name, contact name, address, city, postal code, and country. Okay. So now let's say this is the question, or this is what I want to do. So again, these are the kind of questions that are asked in interviews as well. Not these simple, not such simple ones, but oftentimes you'll be given tables and you'll be asked to execute queries. Okay. So let's say the first thing that I'm asking you guys is, I just want to look at the customer name and the country. That's all. That's the only information that I need. So what should I do? What changes should I make to this existing query? What should I write? Okay. So quick question is, so the question that I'm asking is, give me the customer names and the country. Okay. Is where clause required anywhere till this point? Do we really need the where clause? I don't think we need it, right? Because we are not saying that give us only certain kinds of rows. I'm simply asking you to shorten this data by just giving me the columns and country. Okay. So I'm just asking you to let go of other columns. So what will I do? Customer name, comma, country, from, and next will be customers. So if I run this, I should get only the customer name and country columns with me, right? Now let me make things interesting. So now let's say you are one of the database analyst or data scientist who is looking into the data, and you want to do some experiments on, let's say, understanding the customers who are there in Mexico. So the ask from your manager or the next kind of data that you require is get all the data of customers who are customers from Mexico. So what should I do for that? So now comes the use case of where clause. So I'll say select these two columns from customers. Now I'll say where. Okay. So what do I mean by where? Now I'll specify the condition based on which I want to select data. So I'll say where country equal to Mexico. Okay. So now let's quickly check if this executes and we get an error. Okay. So what does it say? No such column as Mexico. So can anybody highlight what the error is? Okay, quotes. Okay, somebody says quotes and somebody says double quotes. So let's start with double quotes and see what happens. Right. So let's execute this, and it says no result. Okay. Now can anybody tell me why the case is no results? Okay. So I made you guys get confused because I'm talking about just quotes. I put your attention to go towards quotes, but you guys forgot that the country name in the table, if you had looked carefully, was starting with capital M. So now a lot of you will have the question that we said that SQL is case insensitive. Yes, it is case insensitive for defining the name of your tables and the name of your columns, or for using the keywords, but it's not case insensitive for actual data. For actual data, you actually have to put the exact thing. You don't have the option there. So you have to put the capital M over here. You cannot skip it. Okay. So you'll write the capital M and run it. And when you do that, your data will come out. So now let me specify one more thing to you. So right now, your SQL that is being executed in this online platform, we don't know what the underlying RDBMS system is, right? It's encapsulated or black box for us. But from what I've seen from my personal experience, a lot of times double quotes really don't work with SQL. It's a healthy practice. It's a healthy convention to use single quotes. Okay, that's my advice, right? So try to use single quotes. Okay. Another thing which I would like to specify is people who are coming from programming background would feel that double equal to should have been used, right? But in SQL, the whole idea of SQL was to not make things complicated, right? And there's a very simple reason if you think about why this is the case. So in programming, like Python, you do assignment operator where that equal to gets used. In SQL, you're not doing any kind of assignment operator. So your equal to is free to be used. So that's why we are not doing something complicated like double equal to. We are just using single equal to. Anybody who did not understand what I said because they don't know about Python or other programming languages, simply skip what I said. Okay. Only thing you need to know is to compare the values, you had to do country equal to Mexico, and that was it. Don't worry about anything else. Okay. And we'll just do some last few questions on the where, and then we'll stop. Okay. Then we'll stop this session. So one more thing that we should go, like we can go around is right now we decided to look into the customer names and country. Let's say I want to look at all the information about these customers who are from Mexico. Then what should I do? Perfect. So what we'll do is, since we need the information of all columns, and when we know that by now, that to handle columns, we deal with the select part. So to handle all the columns, we'll simply put select star from customers. Okay. So what will happen now? So now we have taken a step ahead now. We are using the star and we are also using where with that. So what are we saying? Simply if we try to understand this query, select star, which means select all columns from the customers table where country is Mexico. That's all. Okay. And now if we run this, we'll get all the information of these 5 customers from Mexico. Everybody able to understand this? Great. Perfect. So let's see what's the next thing that we can pick up over here. So now, if I want to solve a query, so now my focus is going on the row selection part where I can, select distinct kind of rows and do all sorts of operations, right? So let's say that I want to seek the option of looking into multiple countries at once. Okay. So let's say I decide I want to look into Mexico, and at the same time, I want to look into other countries also. So let me first cut this, run the customers table again very quickly. Okay. And I see that there are different countries. Let's say I decide to go with, I want to look at the data in France and Spain. Okay. So what should I do now? Can anybody quickly tell me what should be the syntax for getting this out? Okay, so a lot of you who have past programming experience are able to give some sort of answer, and your answers are not entirely wrong. Okay, your answers are along the right direction. But right now, the kind of topic or point that I'm trying to touch into is that of multiple values to be filtered from the same column. Okay, so what I'm saying is, in country itself, I want to look at multiple values, right? So what will I do for that? I'll simply write country. So earlier what we were doing, we were writing equal to and writing the single value that we needed, but this time we need multiple values, correct? So when you need multiple values, what you can do is you can use a new word called as in. And the whole idea of in is, after in, you can specify a list of different values that are desirable to you. So for example, the desirable values for us are Spain, which we will write in single quotes, right? And again, France, which again we'll write in single quotes. So this is very important. Don't forget the quotes, and we'll put this thing in brackets, right? Why? Because this bracket is encapsulating a list of all the values that we need. Okay. And now if we run this, what will happen? All the customers who belong to either France or Spain will get selected. Can you see in the country column, no other customer is there? Only customers from France and Spain have been selected. Is this clear to everybody? Okay. So that was an additional thing that you do with respect to where. But as we move along in the chapter, so there are still things remaining with respect to where. Okay. And the reason is that there are different kinds of operators that you can use. So right now we are just using an equal to operator, right? What if we are dealing with numbers? Let's say we want to select all the orders which have quantity less than a certain number. So maybe we can execute one of these before we close, right? So basically what I'm saying is, in where you have multiple ways of using these conditions, right? We'll try to use all of them, not in today's class, in future class, but today we'll just experiment with just one more and then we'll stop. Okay, so let's look into another table. Let's not get bored with the customer table. Let's go into some other kind of table. So let's say the table that we decide to go into is, let's pick, okay, let's look at orders. Okay, maybe not the best one. Let's say, let's look at categories. Again, doesn't seem very likely. Okay, this one seems interesting, and the reason is because of the word quantity. Okay, so I have order detail ID, order ID, product ID, and the quantity related to a particular order. So first thing, as a data scientist, it's very important is to understand the information that this data set is trying to give it to you. So it's telling you the details related to with an order. So order detail ID will be some unique serial number of an order. Next, you will have the order with respect to which this was done, right? So what is the order based on which this order is coming up? Then what is the product in this particular order, right? And lastly, what is the quantity in which that product has been ordered? Okay. So by order ID, we simply mean if somebody goes up and orders, then an order ID will be generated, right? And this order ID is repeating if you see. Why? Because in one order ID, there can be multiple products. So this order ID had product 11, the next has product 42, and both have different quantities for which they have been ordered, right? So now the question in hand is, can I run a query which will tell me, which will give me all the products which are ordered, okay, more than 50 times, let's say, or more than 40 times. So what do I need to do for that? Can anybody write the query with me? So we'll start with select, right? And after select, we'll say star, because we want to see all the columns. After that, we'll say from, right? And after from, we'll specify the name of the table, which is order details, right? After specifying that, we'll start specifying the where. But in where, this time what we'll do, we'll simply say quantity. So we know already how to deal with equal to, right? And if I simply write equal to 12, we know what will happen. All the products which have quantity 12 will come. But with numbers, equal to might not be a very interesting operator, because the question that will arise from a manager will be something like, what products were ordered, for example, more than 10 times, right? That's the kind of question that a manager will probably ask. So to do that, you should be able to use the relational operator, which is quantity greater than equal to, let's say, for example, 40. This will tell me orders, okay, and the product IDs of those orders which are selling huge, okay. So what can be the business importance of something like this? We'll be able to target products which are selling very well for our company, right? So let's run this and see what happens. And we see all these different products which are ordered 40 or more than 40 times, right? And there are lots of them if you think about it. Okay. Everybody clear with this now? Everybody understands what we did? And you can play around with all the different signs, right? You can play with less than, greater than, whatever, right? So one more thing that you can do since you're dealing with numbers is between, okay? And the whole idea of between is, let's say if you're trying to look things in a certain range, okay? So you are trying to seek things inside a range, then you can use this. So this can be important not with things like quantity, but maybe let's say we are dealing with something like product ID, for example, okay? And we only want to look at things whose product ID is between 1 and 10. So let's say I'm targeting some certain products. So I'll simply say product ID between 1 and 10. So see, it's written very much like English. You just have to write 1 and 10, between 1 and 10, and it will automatically know what you're trying to do. Okay, so there is some error. Let's see, what is it? It says product ID. So I had spelled wrong. So let's correct the spelling and run this. And we get all the product IDs which are lie between 1 and 10. So there are all these different operators that I've already shown you over here, right? Which can be used inside there, right? So in also you guys have already seen, between you have already seen, and all these are different ones. So there's one more interesting one, which is this double greater than equal to sign. So what this signifies is this is a sign for not equal to actually. It means if you want to check whether a number or a name is not equal to this and you want to get all the data, then you can use this operator. Okay. So we'll experiment with this in the next class, but for now, we'll stop right over here. Before we close, anybody has any questions? Okay, so Rahul, the questions that you are asking, ETL and EDA, these are beyond the context of the chapter that we are covering today, which is SQL, right? So I won't go too deep into it, but I'll give you an idea. So both are firstly very different, but something that is related to SQL is the ETL part, and ETL part is basically, it means extract, transform, load, and it means that you want to capture the data from different tables and make them into one table, right? So that's what we mean by ETL. So ETL is a way in which data scientist uses multiple tables and captures data and creates new tables out of it, okay, by running queries. Okay, so ETL is a bigger step after learning SQL. Okay, next question is, what is NoSQL? Great, so let me answer this. So SQL is a way of dealing with structured data, and NoSQL is a way when we are dealing with non-structured data. Okay, so let's say you're dealing with text messages. So let's say Facebook wants to store all the messages that are getting exchanged in your messenger. Okay, now these will not really go into your proper database, but they'll rather go into a NoSQL database. Okay, so again, learning about NoSQL database is beyond the context over here, but that's the main idea. When you are dealing with data which is unstructured, loosely structured, where structure is not important, then you can deal with no structure. Okay, I think question about PPT is coming a lot of times, so let me quickly answer that. Subrat, are you there on the call with me? How do we share the PPT? Yes.
Yes, sir, I'm there.
Yeah.
I think the materials and the recordings will be provided to them after the session.
Sure. I think that answers the question. The recordings and material will be provided to you guys once the session is over. Okay.
Sir, good evening, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Sai Venkatesh.
Okay.
Sir, recently you told that you told about this France and Mexico example, right?
Yeah.
So I want to get a list by first France and then Mexico, sir. So what's the query should we write for it? Like
we'll discover that in the next slide. It's a topic. It's a clause called as order by, which we'll be studying in the tomorrow's class. So just hold on till then, and you'll know about how to do this by the next class, right? So a lot of you guys will have a lot of ideas regarding trying to do unique things that now that you have the knowledge of SQL, but just hold on till tomorrow's class, because by tomorrow you'll learn a lot more to be able to do much more experimentation, right? So you'll know almost all the clauses that are there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, if you are not speaking, then you can go on mute. Okay.
Sir, are we going to target any RDBMS for learning or
Hello.
I think too many people are speaking at the same time. Can others mute themselves while somebody is talking?
Excuse me, sir. Just a minute. Guys, I'm not allowing you. Sorry, I cannot allow you to unmute yourself. So you can just put your doubts over in the chat. Please.
Yeah, that would be better. It would be more convenient. Okay, Janvi asks how many days the program is. Janvi, the answer is 2 days. We have one more class tomorrow, right? So it's a fundamental of SQL class, right? Essential SQL essential class. So it's a 4-hour thing, 2 hours today and 2 hours tomorrow. Okay, and then obviously there'll be the test on the next day or whatever has been communicated to you guys. Okay, so syllabus of the exam will be exactly whatever we cover in the course, right? So again, you'll know your questions will be from whatever we cover in these sections, nothing outside this. Anything regarding the topics we covered in the class? Okay, so one of the links that you guys already have, which is the W3 schools link, where you can start practicing queries, run queries. So the way to go about is, think of a query in your mind, think of a problem, right? You look at a data and you think, okay, I just want people from a certain country. What should I do? And then try to execute query, right? So maybe you'll struggle today a little bit because you don't know all the clauses, but with the knowledge, whatever you have. So if you want to select certain columns or select certain rows based on where, you should be fairly be able to do that. Okay, shouldn't be a problem. Okay, great. All right, I think we can close this session. Any closing comments?
Yes. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the amazing lecture.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much for the amazing lecture. And guys, I hope you enjoyed today's session. We have our session tomorrow at the same time, that is 7:30. And also, I saw many of their doubts regarding the materials. So you'll be receiving your materials through your mail. You're getting a notification through your mail. And also, your exams are scheduled on 23rd of June, that is Wednesday. So I hope you don't have any more doubts, and we can end the session here. Okay, sir. I'll end the session here then. Thank you so much, sir. Good night.